Hey there and welcome back to another Fruits Basket review. Now before we get started, I just want to say I have read the manga and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points or details. However, for the purpose of these reviews, I like to really only talk about what the anime is presenting and not jump back and forth between manga and anime. This is mostly so I can keep the reviews streamlined and allows anime only fans to watch along and join in too. That being said though, let's get started on the episode, which was filled with all the feels. And we start off right where the previous episode left off, with Toru about to confess her love to Kyo. Now right off the bat, it's clear simply from the tone of the scene and the tension that's been building in Kyo for the last couple of episodes, that this is not going to end very well for anybody involved. And just like that, right away, Kyo cuts Toru off and demands that he's allowed to speak first, asking whether she was in love with him. Toru blushes and Kyo realizes that his hunch was right, and he begins to get kind of angry, asking if she's stupid and if she'd forgotten about her mum, who she previously had stated was the most important thing to her. So of course, right away, he's going for the jugular and trying to push her away instead of being honest with her. And yeah, that's kind of frustrating. One of the most annoying things about the Somas is that they almost never open up about what they actually think or feel. They just bottle everything up and then it explodes at literally the worst time. It's even worse when they know the exact right buttons to push to inflict pain. Case in point right here. He storms off into the rain with Toru following behind him, pleading for him to stop and listen to her, before he starts yelling about how she doesn't know anything about what he's done or what he failed to do, before stating quite ominously, she could have lived. So yeah, pretty obvious from the get-go in the previous episodes who he's referring to here, Kyoko. And this therefore promises to be a pretty big scene in terms of plot development. He then reveals that he was there at the scene of the accident, and that he recognised her mother because he'd met her before when he was a kid, having met her shortly after Kazuma had taken him in. And thus begins another flashback scene. And yeah, I get that we need to see the context of what's being spoken about, but I swear the episodes are becoming mostly flashback at this point. It's just getting a little bit frustrating because it kind of bogs down the plot progression and you can feel how tense the scene is without being ripped away to learn about the past again and again and again. Oh well. Anyway, the beginning of the flashback centers around Kyo's first meeting with Kyoko, where upon seeing him, she immediately comes up to him and starts joking around with him, teasing him, calling him cute, and laughing at his aggressive attitude. Almost immediately, he reveals that he doesn't have a mum and that his dad's trash, and she simply puts her hand on his head and offers some words of comfort, telling him it sounds lonely. It's pretty sweet how she just immediately starts acting like a mother figure to him right off the bat and makes him feel valued and accepted, and it's doubly sweet that he seems to have adopted the putting your hand on somebody's head to comfort them thing. I figured it was just something that he started doing himself, but it makes it even sweeter that he seems to take it from her, especially since he only really does it to Toru. He goes on to reveal that he met up with her mum frequently after that day, learning about Kyoko and her past, her late husband Katsuya, and of course her daughter Toru. And I swear Kyoko is being presented as one of the kindest characters in the show, and probably the character that deserved to die the least of all. Obviously it makes it all the more tragic because she dies, but still. Seriously, she spends day after day sitting with this lonely kid and talking to him about life, saves her daughter's first friend from a gang beating, and raises the other kindest character in the show completely alone after the death of her husband. Kyoko had big Chad energy. We then arrive at the time of Torah'S disappearance, where Kyoko's left crying to Kyo that she's worried because Torah's lost. He tells her to get it together and that he's going to find her and protect her, giving her his man's promise and a fist bump. And then this small child spends the entire night out in the cold trying to find her. Literally all night. And in classic Kyo fashion, he's outclassed by Yuki, who wasn't even out there trying to help Toru at first, just trying to escape the confines of the Soma estate. Poor Kyo. Life is never easy for that kid. It must really suck to have your hated rival steal the new family you were trying to make away from you, or at least that's how it must appear to Kyo. We even see him pass where Toru would have been if Yuki hadn't found her, and it's pretty tragic. And then Kyoko appears with the famous hat in her hands, telling him Toru had been found and that the kid who helped her was wearing the hat. And this prompts a meltdown from Kyo, who runs away feeling like Yuki's taken something else from him. Side note, even when getting yelled at by this kid, Kyoko's able to keep calm and collected and pinpoints exactly why he's so angry. He feels like making Yuki the bad guy gives him somebody to hate and thus something to keep fighting against. And she simply tells him he needs to let go of all that anger and try to move past it, otherwise it's going to consume him. Now don't get me wrong, we all love Kazuma and we know he's a brilliant dad, but to be honest, she would have been such a good mum to Kyo, she knows what's up. He then reveals to Toru that he never went back to see her, which makes me wonder how terrible Kyoko probably felt, knowing that this little kid was out there feeling terrible about his life with nobody to talk to about it. This show just loves to smash you with tragic scenario after tragic scenario. We then flash back to Kyo in the moments before the accident, recognizing Kyoko and debating whether he should say something before he notices a car coming towards him out of control. He considers pulling her back, but realizes that puts him at risk of transforming and hesitates, allowing Kyoko to get hit by the car. And I mean, you could argue semantics about the way he could have pulled her back without full-on holding her, but in the heat of the moment, I guess he didn't really have much time to think. As Toru stands there shell-shocked, he then tells her how he chose to save himself rather than her mother despite the fact that he hates himself and wishes he could go away forever. The poor dude is just so seriously depressed. And then he tells her he's still protecting himself and running away and that he can't even look at her. He goes on to tell her the truth about his mother's death and how it happened in a similar way, except it wasn't an accident. And that he'd heard her say she regretted giving birth to him and that she pitied him too much to spend too much time with him. After hearing that, he says that she went on to kill herself the next day. So yeah, pretty dark stuff. Poor Kyo. I swear he literally has the worst luck in the show. And it was also really sad that he thought it was his fault she died. The dad is clearly abusive in that scene. Regardless of what his mother said, it clearly wasn't his fault. On top of that, his dad blaming him for her death at the funeral is a bit over the top. What a psycho. What's up with the parents in this show? The Soma family is truly deranged. He then concludes his depressing little speech by claiming responsibility for both Kyoko and his own mother's deaths and saying that he's a monster. It feels very reminiscent of when Kazuma revealed his true form at the end of season 1. Like he feels like there's no hope of return, so he has to have everything out on the table and has admitted complete defeat. The scene then cuts to Akito running through the streets heading towards Shigeru's house, looking quite deranged as she does so. So that doesn't seem like it's going to end very well at all. She's clearly intending to stab somebody. Kyo then continues on with an internal monologue stating that when he heard Kyoko give him sympathy about his loneliness and lack of parental figures, he felt forgiven for even existing at all. And this is both super sweet in that Kyoko made him feel cared for and appreciated within minutes of meeting him, but it's also pretty dark that a small child was having these types of thoughts to begin with. His parents essentially told him that his existence is completely disgusting and that he should never have been born. Now obviously the dad's terrible, and the mum didn't really kill herself because of Kyo. But she wasn't all that great either. I feel like it's just very easy to feel sorry for her because she had an abusive husband. And of course you do, but she also wasn't there for her child in the way that she should have been. She kept him locked up inside with her and then complained about having to do so. It is really quite depressing that Kyo's early childhood had nobody who truly cared about him when you think about it. We then have a cute little scene where Kyo recounts to Kazuma how he met a weird person. But good weird, not bad weird. And that she told him he should come around and visit again. And Kazuma just smiles and encourages him. Does stranger danger not exist in this world? I realize he's new to the whole parenting thing, but surely he should sniff around a little to make sure Kyo's okay. The kid has gone through some traumatic experiences. Maybe it would be best to be a little bit more hands-on with who he's supposedly going to see so regularly, especially when he describes him as weird. Kyo's thoughts then return to Kyoko, who he describes as a ray of light in his life, as one of 2 people in his life that actually wanted him around. He then thinks back on how he'd even got to see Toru as a child, watching her from outside and thinking that she looked lonely. Side note, Kyo obviously loved Kazuma, but it very much feels as though he was more drawn to Toru's family in the early stages after his mum's death. If things hadn't gone south with him not being able to find Toru, it makes you wonder the extent of what his relationship could have been with Kyoko and Toru at a much earlier age. Even as a kid, he decided he wanted Toru and Kyoko to be happy, and would find himself thinking about the 2 of them and hoping they were okay, which of course led to him visiting, to find Toru missing, and eventually led to him never seeing Kyoko again, until her death. He tells Toru that the last words her mother told him were, "I won't forgive you," which yeah, it's pretty understandable as to why that would probably mess him up and make him freak out a little bit. We then get to see the aftermath of Kyoko's death on Kyo, with him sitting in the dark in his room at the dojo and Kazuma trying to get him to open up about what's happened. And eventually this leads to him taking him to live in the mountains for a while, like he said he did at the start of season 1. We see that the time he spent in the mountains wasn't mostly training like he said, and he was basically just going through the motions and had lost all the joy in his life. And once again, you gotta feel bad for Kyo here, but also real bad for Kazuma too. One day his son, who struggled all his life, comes home traumatized and stays that way for what's likely weeks or even months, struggling to open up and seemingly losing the will to live. Finally, he says that in his despair, he turned all his pain into denial, putting the blame for everything that's gone wrong in his life onto Yuki and renewing his hatred for him. He describes how he made Yuki the bad guy for everything, even if it wasn't logical, just because he needed that bad guy to hate so he wouldn't hate himself. And I found this pretty interesting because it kind of echoes Toru's story about her own father. We then see Yuki wake up in the present in his room and look out the window to see Kyo and Toru outside in the rain looking pretty upset. It's pretty lucky that Yuki seemingly has a sixth sense when people are talking about him and when something super dramatic's about to go down. And luckily for the audience, Kyo then explains the reason why he's not had this breakdown about Kyoko before. He managed to erase the memory of the day Kyoko died by being consumed by his hatred. Very Star Wars. Also, I think it's kind of clear that this isn't wholly true. Deep down, he'd pushed it aside, but there were moments in Season 1 where he'd woken from a nightmare, which was assumedly about Kyoko, where he apologized to Totoro after her mother's first anniversary, and when he's with Akito in Season 2 and he remembers Kyoko's death. Plus, he also says that he recognized Toru straight away when he found out her last name, so it's not like when he was in the mountains he completely forgot about everything. He just got triggered majorly by seeing the hat in the room, and it unlocked all those memories in him. He describes how when he came back from the mountains, he was summoned to see Akito and made a bet with her, that if he could defeat Yuki before graduating high school, he'd be welcomed as a full Zodiac member and she'd no longer call him a monster. But if he lost, he'd be confined to the cat house forever. And that of course led to him meeting Toru in Season 1. It really does tie it all together nicely, and it gives a lot of motivation to Kyo's character. Some interesting endgame development, that's for sure. He concludes by saying that Kyoko was right about him, that he doesn't deserve forgiveness, and that he can't forgive himself, and that he doesn't even want Toru's forgiveness. And then we see one of the few times Toru's seemingly gotten angry at somebody, basically telling him he's full of it, and that everything he said doesn't even matter. That she doesn't believe her mum would say something like that, and that she loves him regardless. To which Kyo, in a moment of spectacular self-sabotage, tells her he's disappointed in her, only days after telling her she could never disappoint him. Ouch. Anyway, he runs off with Yuki in pursuit, calling him an idiot, leaving Toru alone in the rain, only to come face to face with a very unhinged looking Akito with the knife she stabbed Kureno with. Cliffhangers galore. And then that brings us to the end of the episode. And yikes, that was intense. Each episode of Fruits Basket this season's been packed with such emotional baggage, it's a full-on experience every time. It's rare to find a story that does this so well, and I'm really enjoying the road to the finale. In terms of highlights, it was really good to see more of Kyo's inner thoughts and to find out the extent of his relationship with Kyoko. And it was also great to see Toru stand up for what she wants. That being said, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the episode? Like it? Hate it? Make sure to leave a comment and let me know.